morning.
Good morning.
I see a lot of familiar faces out there. It's good to see everybody. You're making me a little nervous. But my name is Rachel Estrada, and I'm here to talk to you today about cross-boundary landscape conservation. I worked in conjunction with the National Park Service and specifically looked at connecting private landowners with federal land managers on collaboration and being able to work together across property lines on common conservation goals. This all began in the 1950s when the Bureau of Reclamation began purchasing land for the reservoir system. In 1956, we began construction on the reservoirs, and those include Blue Mesa Dam, Crystal, and Morro Point Dam. And they also are in conjunction, work together under the Colorado River Agreement Pact, and it includes states like Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico. The primary purpose of this reservoir system is for water and water storage. And today, there are several stakeholders that manage and operate these systems, including the Bureau of Reclamation that runs the dams and the structures. CPW, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, runs the fisheries, where Western Power Authority runs the electrical transmission lines, and the National Park Service runs the resource, education, and recreation outlets and facilities. It is important to note that today, currently, Kerr County National Recreation Area is cooperatively managed between the National Park Service and Bureau of Reclamation. It currently has no legislative boundary. We've been working on it for 15 years. In 2008, there was an environmental impact statement completed at Kerr County National Recreation Area. It had two proposed actions. One to operate as is, and the second was to, among other recommendations, to incorporate a conservation opportunity area program and to help establish and confirm that national recreation area boundary. In addition to this, they would have land exchanges with mutually agreed upon lands between Forest Service, BLM of up to 10,000 acres. This would help reduce costs, and it would also streamline management practices and strategies across the landscape. The overall arching goal of the COA initiative is to improve, identify, and protect ecosystems that are critical to biodiversity, human quality of life, and landscape functions. Of course, all of this includes a lot of partnerships between federal, state, and private landowners. Okay, this conservation opportunity map came out of 2008 EIS, and I need a little cheat sheet because I'm literally just going to point out the colors here. So the black line around, the black line indicates that the proposed Kerr County boundary, that the EIS statement. The pink line indicates, indicates the existing property boundary. The orange indicates BLM lands to be transferred to the National Park Service. Yellow is a Bureau of Reclamation that is actually already within or will be acquired by the National Park Service. Teal is Colorado Parks and Wildlife land to be acquired by National Park Service. And pink is National Park Service lands remaining in the National Recreation Area. It's important to note that the National Recreation Area is coupled under or with alongside the National Park Service. The green located up here on the top is National Forest lands that would be transferred to the Park Service. Blue, like in this area, a little bit right there, are lands that are actually to be set to be deleted from the National Recreation Area boundary. And most importantly, specifically for my project, are these gray areas, and those illustrate the COA parcels that have been identified on private land, and those are the parcels where we'd be working collaboratively across those property lines to manage our landscape holistically, and we can address several fragmentation issues from those points of perspective. Managing of the landscape is important, especially within this specific park where it's long and narrow. Our geography kind of limits us. And it's advantageous to use the COA program to manage across this park because we cover Montrose and Gunnison counties, and we are surrounded by 175 private landowners, as well as incorporating National Park Service, National Forest Service, BLM. So if we can get this collaboration working together, we build those relationships and then potentially long-term partnerships. Let's see. It helps to facilitate management between private stakeholders as well as federal stakeholders. And in this case, we can recognize all resources and hopefully utilize and accomplish more conservation goals on a landscape level. The COA program is innovative because it utilizes the idea of pooling resources, the idea of more tools in the pot, so to speak, from the perspective of being able to use federal to private resources, as well as it supports a network of stakeholders that are invested in an overall health of the landscape. And finally, it does address quite a few fragmentation issues. These issues can include, but not limited to, invasive plant species, soil degradation, water quality, bioregimes, and even just wildlife health and patterns, migration patterns. My objectives in this project included identifying landowner conservation values and gauging the willingness of surrounding landowners on conservation strategies. Are private landowners really wanting to collaborate and work across those property boundaries? And we also needed to know what kind of features they valued, and in that, what conservation strategies would they be willing to work with us on. Finally, I wanted to explore a Blue Mesa cooperative or maybe a coalition, and this would be an idea of maybe private landowners and creating some sort of panel or coalition, and they would be able to partner with the National Park Service, and we'd be able to work together with the conservation opportunity area, kind of give some strength to the private landowners while kind of providing a springboard to talk to the National Park Service and other federal land managers. My methods included quantitative and qualitative methods. Initially, my first step was qualitative, for quantitative surveys. I had to compile a mailing list, which of 175 landowners was a big task, and with many help from quite a few people in the Park Service, I was able to obtain some shape files and some GSI files, or GIS files. And it was impeccable timing. It wasn't planned this way, but this fall I had received word that our county commissioner, Jonathan Houck, was planning to send out a letter to surrounding landowners at the same time. And he was looking at mainly asking landowners of what their perceptions were, and kind of along the same ideas of what I was looking at, basically based on the boundary line of natural recreation area being introduced into Congress. And so instead of having our landowners receive two letters, one about research and one from the county commissioner, he offered to combine that letter with me, and that was extremely advantageous, and it gave my project a lot of credibility. And on top of it, we were able to compare mailing lists, which was great because there's some people out there that don't necessarily want to be found or have mailing addresses available. So in total, I had 175 surveys go out, either by mail or online survey, and 67 of them were returned with a pretty high response rate of 38%. My second phase of methodologies was interviews, and this is a qualitative approach. In-depth personal interviews that are meant so you can sit down and really extract more information and on a meaningful basis, where the surveys kind of initiated that, and the interviews would hopefully kind of dive deeper. I was able to conduct and complete 8 interviews with landowners surrounding both Black Canyon and Kerr County. I then transcribed with the help of Hannah England, and she transcribed all the interviews, and I imported them into Deduce, and which is a qualitative coding software. And what this does, it helps me analyze and then identify the trends across all interviews. So, okay, results, the fun part. Results from my survey. Overall, a high ethic of environmental stewardship was apparent in landowners, and the majority at 8% were willing to collaborate with the National Park Service on conservation. I also wanted to gauge what kind of values landowners had and what they valued on their property. With wildlife habitat and viewing got cut off right there, but that's what that is, and peace and quiet actually tying for first, and dark night skies and proximity to public land coming in third and fourth. The general perception of the National Park Service is positive, and the support for the COA program trended really high, as well as valuing the National Park Service as a good neighbor. The graph on the right also just demonstrates that participants are willing and to collaborate on projects that span both properties, or span property lines. I also wanted to get an idea of what private property owners would collaborate on. A lot of them had a lot of projects already in place that they've implemented themselves, but the top three came in at invasive plant control, wildlife management and restoration, wildfire management and mitigation, with stream and forest restoration coming in behind them. Simple questions that Park Service just wanted to know. Do private landowners value communication? And overall, you can see we had a 82% rate of overwhelming yes, which is good to know. Some people don't want to talk to us. I also wanted to gauge the level of conservation and what that exactly means to our private landowners. And overall, you can see here by the graph that most participants said that it was okay to intervene to correct past actions, and specifically human actions on conservation. My results ended with wild and scenic viewsheds and solitude were frequent responses. Emergent themes included, but were not limited to, lack of communication and just a general distrust of government in some cases. However, the overall response, the majority of the responses from the interviews and surveys were positive, and it's exemplified here in this quote where it says, "I really do appreciate the quiet and solitude and just the general beauty, and I have a great view of the lake and the mountains." Another landowner exemplified this specifically with the land with the coalition, and said that yes, he would be interested, but the Park Service is going to have to find a way to build trust with landowners and build those relationships again. My next step recommendations to the National Park Service include establishing trust and relationships with our landowners through consistent communication. This could be as easy as an annual newsletter, and in that newsletter they could cover park updates and new employees, and maybe means to contact those folks. Within the newsletter you could also cover emergent themes. Some that were expressed in my interviews were fracking in the West, beetle kill was a big topic, and wildlife trended over and over again as a big feature. Another thing that we could involve or include in the newsletter would be conservation strategies and ways that private landowners could be involved, and it'd be a good way to keep them informed. And finally, my recommendation of a Blue Mesa Collaborative or coalition where private landowners would partner together to work together with the National Park Service on conservation projects. So in conclusion, I have, through a combination of qualitative and quantitative methods, collected and provided a baseline of data about landowner perceptions and conservation values. My research will assist the National Park Service to manage lands as a landscape and potentially to introduce and support a COA program, Conservation Opportunity Program. And by understanding these values, I hope that by understanding the values and the perceptions of private landowners, the management team at the National Park Service can hopefully and effectively begin to build relationships and ultimately facilitate the management of a new era of conservation landscape conservation. And that concludes my presentation.
Hannah England. So what's going to happen to the land that's still
showed earlier.
You said there was gonna be some land.
Deleted?
Yeah.
I think they're just like federal lands that are within the National Recreation Area boundary. That might just, it's a land exchange mutually agreed upon. So just under simple streamlining and just being able to manage that area more effectively. So it might go to Forest Service or kind of surrounding areas that it's coupled with rather than staying within our own boundary. So it's under that exchange. We're gaining and losing some land as well. So, Jeff?
It's a techniques question I'm curious about. How did you select which 8 people to interview, and how do you know when you've interviewed enough people?
Good questions. I was naive in expecting, I had quite a few participants indicate that they would interview with me. I think it was 22 off of 175. And just simple connection issues and being able to contact them. I was a little naive in thinking that everybody's going to want to talk to me about this. I'm going to be like turning people down. And then I was like, I had 8. So overall, though, it was more of a random sampling than anything, and it came down to just who could meet with me. I preferred person to person, but a lot of these folks I was interviewing in like late fall into winter, and a lot of them are snowbirds, so they had already left the area, so I had to do phone interviews. So it kind of just came down to logistics in a lot of cases. And as far as knowing how many are enough, a question that we always were asking Dr. Knapp, it came to a point of saturation, or when you heard answers, because my interview questions were all scripted and everybody received the same questions. And once I started hearing the same answers over and over again, it comes to a point of saturation where you kind of evaluated the whole field, and you may get some outliers, but generally it's the same responses. So, I gotta go ahead.
So when I was in graduate school, I learned we weren't supposed to deal with hypothetical situations. I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you a hypothetical question. So let's just say we go 5, 10, 20 more years and we don't have boundary legislation for Kure County National Recreation Area, and therefore we don't have conservation opportunity areas. Would you see that changing anything in terms of the need for the National Park Service to work with some of the adjoining landowners?
Yes. This is mainly where the idea of the Blue Mesa Coalition of private landowners stemmed from, because obviously this legislation, the dams have been there for a while, and we've operated as is for a while, and hopefully it would be, the boundary will be confirmed. But if it doesn't, the coalition of private landowners is maybe a means to start doing this without the COA program. And so I hope to, I'm hosting an open house this summer at the Elk Creek Visitor Center of all our private landowners and federal land managers to start initiating those first steps of communicating and just introducing each other, and just maybe even to simply start like a phone list, get those ideas flowing. So hopefully it could start without legislation happening. There are funding sources, grants available that you don't need to necessarily have a federal agency, go after. A private landowner could do this just as easily. And same with the Park Service. We could work with a lot of grants outside of our normal framework of funding.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Corey?
I have a question from Diego online, and he asks, what, if any, difficulties did you run into in approaching stakeholders as a student and a member of National Park Service staff, and how did you overcome them?
Thank you, Diego. 30 seconds. I actually approached all my interviews and surveys as a student. And it was just, I did disclose if they asked if I was a Park Service, but more than not, people were happy to talk to a graduate student, and they wanted to engage in research. And sitting down with these landowners, I timed our interviews to hopefully be like 30 to 45 minutes, but at points I was like having to cut people off at like an hour and a half because they're just excited to talk about their land and excited that a federal agency is engaging with them